The JonBenét Ramsey case is a mess. It's a story with too many strange details and not enough answers. You have a garrote made from a paintbrush, a ridiculously long ransom note written inside the house, a little girl found in her own basement. And for decades, people have argued about who did it. Was it an intruder? Was it the parents, John and Patsy? Was it the brother, Burke, Ahmed? All that chaos. One small, simple detail stands out. It's a piece of fruit. A piece of pineapple. This pineapple was found in JonBenét's stomach during the autopsy. And that single, mundane fact might be the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. It doesn't scream for attention like the ransom note. It's not as sinister as the garrote. But the pineapple tells a story, it creates a timeline, and that timeline contradicts the story the Ramsey family told the world. So, was the pineapple the key to solving the case? The word key is tricky. A key unlocks something completely. This clue didn't do that. The case is still unsolved. But it might be the closest thing to a key that investigators ever found. It points in a direction. It shines a light on a specific window of time, and it raises very uncomfortable questions for the people inside that house on that Christmas night. To understand why the pineapple matters so much, you have to start with the autopsy. When the coroner examined JonBenét's body, he looked at the contents of her stomach and small intestine. This is standard procedure. It helps determine the time of death. The stomach works in a predictable way. Food is eaten, it stays in the stomach for a while, getting broken down by acid, and then it moves into the small intestine. The process takes hours. The coroner found what he identified as pineapple in JonBenét's stomach. Not just traces of it, pieces of it. Crucially, he noted that it appeared to be only partially digested. This was a huge deal. It meant she had eaten it very recently before she died, not 4 or 5 hours before. More like an hour or two, maybe even less. The food hadn't had time to move on. Her digestive system basically stopped when she was killed. So the physical evidence provided a critical piece of information. JonBenét Ramsey ate pineapple shortly before she was murdered. This fact on its own seems simple enough, but it becomes explosive when you place it next to the timeline given by her parents. And John and Patsy Ramsey told police a very clear story about the night of December 25th, 1996. They had gone to a Christmas party at their friend's house, the Whites. They left the party around 9 or 9:30 p.m. They said JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car on the way home. John said he carried his sleeping daughter upstairs, and Patsy changed her into her pajamas and put her to bed. They claimed she never woke up. They said the next time they were aware of anything being wrong was the next morning, when Patsy found the ransom note on the stairs. Their story is one of a quiet end to a Christmas day. A child put to bed, sleeping soundly, and then abducted by an intruder in the middle of the night. It's a clean, straightforward timeline, but the pineapple blows a hole right through it. If JonBenét was asleep from the car ride until she was supposedly taken by an intruder, when did she eat the pineapple? She certainly didn't eat it in her sleep. She didn't eat it in the car. The Ramseys were clear about that. The Whites, the hosts of the party, were also asked. They didn't serve pineapple. So, she didn't eat it there. The autopsy result creates a direct contradiction. The Ramsey story says JonBenét was asleep. The pineapple in her stomach says she was awake. The Ramsey story says she was put in her bed and didn't leave it. The pineapple says she was up somewhere eating a snack, and she was doing it not long before she was killed. This is where the clue starts to point away from the tidy intruder theory and toward the messy reality of what might have happened inside the house that night. The police searched the Ramsey home. In the kitchen, on a counter in the breakfast nook, they found a bowl. It was a white bowl sitting on the countertop. Inside the bowl was pineapple. There was a large, long-handled spoon in the bowl. It looked like someone had been serving themselves from it. On the table nearby was a glass of sweet tea. This wasn't just some random piece of fruit. There was a physical source for it right there in the family's kitchen. This wasn't something an intruder brought with them. It was the family's food. The police, of course, took the bowl and tested it for fingerprints. They found 2 sets of prints. One set belonged to Patsy Ramsey. The other set belonged to JonBenét's 9-year-old brother, Burke Ramsey. Now the story gets even more complicated. You have pineapple in JonBenét's stomach. You have a bowl of pineapple on the counter, and you have the fingerprints of her mother and brother on that bowl. JonBenét's own prints weren't found on the bowl, but that doesn't mean much. She could have been served by someone else, or her prints might just not have been clear enough to lift. The presence of Patsy's and Burke's prints on that bowl, combined with the pineapple in JonBenét's stomach, firmly connects the family to JonBenét's last snack. It places them all in a moment in time that, according to John and Patsy's official story, never happened. This clue became a cornerstone for investigators who suspected the family was involved. The theory, in its simplest form, goes something like this. The Ramseys came home from the party. JonBenét did not stay asleep. She woke up, or perhaps she was never fully asleep to begin with. She came downstairs. Maybe she was hungry. Maybe Patsy offered her a snack to get her to go back to bed. Maybe she got it for herself, but she was awake. And she was eating. And her brother Burke was there. What happened next is the subject of intense speculation. One popular theory, advanced by many investigators over the years, focuses on Burke. The idea is that JonBenét, being a 6-year-old, might have tried to sneak a piece of pineapple from Burke's bowl. And Burke, who some reports suggested had a history of minor behavioral issues, might have lashed out in a moment of childish anger. Maybe he didn't mean to hurt her badly. Maybe he hit her on the head with a heavy object, like a large flashlight that was also found in the kitchen. In this scenario, the blow to her head caused the skull fracture that the autopsy found. It was a serious injury that would have rendered her unconscious or killed her. The parents, John and Patsy, then found their daughter grievously injured or dead. And in a state of panic, they decided to cover it up. They staged a kidnapping to protect their remaining child. The guarantee, the ransom note, the broken window in the basement, it was all a frantic, elaborate fabrication designed to point police away from their own son. The pineapple is the anchor for this entire theory. Without the pineapple, there's no evidence that JonBenét was even awake. There's no reason to believe there was any interaction between her and her family after they got home. The pineapple creates the opportunity for a domestic accident or a moment of violence. It puts JonBenét, Patsy, and Burke together in the kitchen in the critical hours between their return from the party and the 911 call the next morning. The Ramseys, of course, denied this. They stuck to their story. When confronted with the evidence of the pineapple, their explanations shifted slightly, but they never admitted to a late-night snack. Patsy suggested that maybe she had given JonBenét some pineapple earlier in the day, before the party. But that doesn't fit the forensic evidence. Partially digested pineapple means recent consumption. Pineapple eaten many hours earlier would have been long gone from her stomach. And John Ramsey offered another idea. He suggested that maybe the intruder who broke in was the one who fed his daughter pineapple. This is where the intruder theory starts to sound very strange. Why would a kidnapper in the middle of a high-stakes crime pause to give his victim a snack? It makes no logical sense. Are we to believe an intruder crept into the house, went to the kitchen, found a bowl of pineapple, and then found JonBenét, woke her up, and fed her some fruit before killing her? It's a bizarre and convoluted scenario. An intruder's goal is to be quiet and fast. Stopping for a snack introduces noise, time, and risk. It feels deeply improbable. The pineapple clue feels personal. It feels domestic. It's the kind of detail that happens in a family home when people are comfortable, not during a terrifying home invasion. Let's look at Burke's interviews with police and psychologists. They are, to put it mildly, strange. He was just a child, and it's important to remember that. He was being questioned about the death of his sister. But his demeanor was often described as detached or unusual. When asked about that night, his stories were inconsistent. He initially told police he was asleep the whole time and didn't hear a thing. But later, he seemed to suggest he was awake and went downstairs. In one interview, when asked about the pineapple, he seemed to know about the bowl on the table. He was asked if he thought JonBenét had maybe taken some of his pineapple, and if that would have made him mad. It's hard to draw firm conclusions from the interviews of a 9-year-old boy conducted under such traumatic circumstances. But his presence, confirmed by his fingerprint near that bowl of pineapple, is a fact that cannot be ignored. The pineapple doesn't just challenge the Ramseys' timeline, it helps build a new one. To reconstruct the night using the pineapple as our guide, the Ramseys arrive home around 9:30 p.m. John carries JonBenét upstairs, Patsy changes her. So far, the story holds. But then, at some point in the next hour or two, JonBenét is awake again. She comes downstairs. Patsy is in the kitchen preparing a snack for Burke, or maybe for herself. The bowl of pineapple is out. JonBenét is given some, or takes some. Burke is there. An event occurs. It could be an accident. It could be an outburst of anger, but something happens that results in JonBenét suffering a massive blow to the head. This injury is the cause of death, or at least the beginning of the end. The strangulation with the garrote and the sexual assault could have been part of the staging to make it look like a crime committed by a sadistic intruder. The coroner estimated the time of death to be around 1 a.m. The pineapple in her stomach, eaten around 10:30 or 11 p.m., fits perfectly within this timeline. It fits the forensic evidence in a way the Ramseys' official story simply does not. So if the pineapple clue is so powerful, why wasn't the case solved? Why wasn't anyone arrested and convicted based on this? This is where the reality of the American legal system and the failures of this specific investigation come in. The pineapple clue is what's known as circumstantial evidence. It's not direct proof, like a video of the crime or a signed confession. It's a fact that implies another fact. The pineapple implies JonBenét was awake and with her family. It implies the Ramseys lied about their timeline. It strongly suggests the crime was an inside job. But a defense attorney could attack this evidence. They could argue the coroner's estimate of digestion time is just an estimate. They could say that digestion rates vary from person to person. They could create doubt. They could argue that the fingerprints on the bowl mean nothing. It's their kitchen. Of course, their prints are on their own dishes. They could have eaten pineapple from that bowl hours or days before. And the defense did exactly that. The Ramseys had a powerful legal and public relations team. They consistently pushed the intruder theory. They pointed to other pieces of evidence, like a single unidentified male DNA sample found on JonBenét's underwear, as proof of an outsider. They highlighted the broken basement window and a scuff mark on the wall as the intruder's point of entry, even though investigators found a spider web in the window that was undisturbed. The biggest problem, however, was the crime scene itself. The first 24 hours of the investigation were a catastrophe. When Patsy Ramsey called 911 to report her daughter missing, she said she found a ransom note. The police who arrived treated it as a kidnapping, not a murder. They failed to secure the house. Friends and family were allowed to come and go. They walked through the house, cleaned the kitchen, and potentially contaminated evidence everywhere. And John Ramsey himself was the one who found JonBenét's body in the basement, hours after police arrived. He picked her up and carried her upstairs, further disturbing the scene. Because the crime scene was so badly compromised, any piece of evidence, including the pineapple, became harder to use. The defense could argue that the scene was a chaotic mess, and nothing found there could be trusted. So the pineapple clue, as strong as it was, existed in a sea of confusion. There was conflicting evidence, a contaminated crime scene, and a family with the resources to mount a formidable defense. The pineapple couldn't stand alone. It needed other, stronger pieces of evidence to support it. And while there were many other suspicious details pointing toward the family, the ransom note written on a notepad from their house, with a pen from their house, Patsy's fibers found on the duct tape over JonBenét's mouth, John's seemingly rehearsed behavior, none of it was a smoking gun. There was no single piece of evidence that was irrefutable. A grand jury in 1999 did vote to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death. This is a critical point that is often forgotten. The people who saw all the evidence believed there was enough to charge the parents. The district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, refused to sign the indictment and prosecute the case. He felt he couldn't secure a conviction. He feared he would lose in court. He didn't think the circumstantial evidence, including the pineapple, was strong enough to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And so, the case stalled. The pineapple clue, which should have broken the case wide open, was relegated to being just one more strange detail in a story full of them. But for those who have studied the case for years, the pineapple remains central. It is the silent witness. It cannot lie. It cannot be coached by lawyers. It cannot be spun by public relations experts. It is a simple biological fact. JonBenét Ramsey ate pineapple just before she died. That fact tells us she was not asleep in her bed. It tells us the story her parents told is not true. And if they were not telling the truth about something so simple, it forces the question, what else were they not telling the truth about? The pineapple doesn't tell us who hit JonBenét on the head. It doesn't tell us who tied the garrote around her neck. It doesn't tell us why a beautiful 6-year-old girl had to die in her own home on Christmas night. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it tells us where to look for the answers. It points away from the dark, snowy streets of Boulder, Colorado, and away from the phantom intruder the Ramseys insisted was to blame. It points directly back inside the house. It points to the kitchen, it points to the last few hours of a little girl's life, and it points to the only people who were there with her. Was it the key? No, a key that doesn't open the lock is not a key. The case remains officially unsolved, but the pineapple clue was the one piece of evidence that had the potential to unravel the entire narrative the Ramseys constructed. It was the loose thread in their story, and if police had been able to pull on that thread with a clean crime scene and a determined prosecution, it might have unraveled everything. It remains the most damning, most inconvenient, and most telling fact in the tragic mystery of who killed JonBenét Ramsey. It's the ghost of her last snack, a quiet but persistent clue that has haunted this case from the very beginning.